Hello, my name's Chelsea and I'll be your server today. That's a sentence you're very unlikely to hear in Switzerland, partly because names like Chelsea aren't allowed. Your baby has to have its name registered with the community registrar, and names that are going to harm the baby in any way are not allowed. So you're not allowed to use place names like Brooklyn or Chelsea. You're not allowed to use brand names like Pepsi or Armani. You can't use bad boy names like Judas, and names which will let the children be insulted. So Richard Head or Merry Christmas or even Paris Hilton, or Tallulah does the hula from Hawaii, which was a name given to a poor child in New Zealand. And you're also not allowed to give names that will do anything to harm the children's well-being, so like Aryan Nation or Adolf Hitler or anything like that. So although it does sound rather controlling, it is with the child's interest at heart. What it does mean is that you get an awful lot of Swiss people with very similar names. So you get lots of Doris Mullers and lots of 30-year-old men called Stefan or Martin. The other reason why you're never likely to hear that sentence in Switzerland is because first names are something quite private. They're not used automatically, especially in business situations. You tend to use surnames or family names first. And so you can get a business situation like I had in the shop where I used to work, where my boss called me Herr Bewes, even though we worked together for 5 years. And my name badge, unusually, had both my names on it, Diccon Bewes. And that's because I worked in the English bookshop, the English department, and we decided we would have both our names on our badges. In the rest of the shop, very typically for Swiss shop workers, just had the initial and the surname. My colleagues didn't want necessarily the customers to know their first names, and customers didn't want to know people's first names. It's a very private thing. And so it means that in Switzerland you start with surnames generally, and then you move on to first names, rather like when you make the transition from formal you, Z, to informal you, do. You then change to first names. And it came home to me in America when I was there last month, just how different it is there and how alienating it can be for Americans to come here and have no one using first names to begin with. It's not just in restaurants where your server always introduces you. It also happened in a shop in California. Gregor and I were in there, and he wanted to try on a t-shirt. And as he went to the changing room with the shop assistant, she asked him his first name. And I could see Gregor standing there thinking, why on earth do you want me to tell you my first name? I'm never going to see you again. All I want to do is try on a shirt. And really, do you need my name for that? And there was this slight discomfort on both parts, because she could see he was hesitant and he really didn't want to give her his first name, but he did in the end. But it just made me realize that in Switzerland it is very different. In England, it's changing slightly. You can see it a little bit more when the gas board calls you up. They ask you your first name or greet you by your first name. And when we were there last year and listening to a radio phone-in, there was the Prime Minister on the radio, and people were calling up and saying, "Hello, David," and then asking him a question. Whereas it wasn't even Mr. Cameron or Mr. Prime Minister or something very formal like that. In Switzerland, the current president is Micheline Carmi-Ray, and you would almost never hear her addressed as Micheline in any situation. She would be Frau or Madame Carmi-Ray, or even Frau Bundespräsidentin. So first names are something that obviously do exist. Swiss people do have first names, generally only one. There are very few Swiss people with two first names. And the most popular ones were released last week. The government released the list of the most popular names from last year. And top of the list for boys was Noah. And then came Luca and Leon. And top of the list for girls was Lena. And then Mia and Lara. It's all quite short, easy to remember, often begin with L. Of course, there are regional differences. The top name in the French-speaking part was Nathan, and the top girl's name there was Emma. And in the Italian-speaking part, it was Mattia and Giulia. So the language does come into it a bit. But even so, it's still a question of, you give your first name to people when they become your friend. With the young generation, it is changing slowly, But there still is that pressure to conform and that pressure to be a little bit more formal, especially with people you don't know or people who are older than you. And so I have to get used to using my last name. And my last name isn't an easy name for Swiss people. Bewes does not sit well on a Swiss tongue. And so invariably I get called Bewes. And so I have gone from being Diccon, as I am in England, to basically being Herr Bewes now. I have a Swiss alter ego.